Okay, do you want to go ahead and to do introductions and then I'll jump in?
Sure. I figure we can introduce ourselves and our committee, and then I can introduce Nicole. So, so I'm Stephanie Frumkin, and this is Rachel Tates. Wave your hand, Rachel. um, we are the MCC PTA Special Education chairs. I'm the vice chair, and Rachel is the chair of the committee. And we are very excited to be here tonight. I know this has been a question on a lot of people's mind about compensatory education. So we're very, very fortunate to have Nicole Joseph here with us tonight, and I will introduce her in just a minute. I just wanted to introduce ourselves though. Rachel, could you say a little bit kind of like what you sort of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hey guys, my name is Rachel Watanabe Tate. I'm the chair of the MCC PTA committee for the county. I see a bunch of people here that I run in the same circles with, so welcome to everyone. I know this has been a topic that has been on a lot of parents' minds, so I just wanted to welcome Nicole and say thank you so much for joining us tonight and giving this community the opportunity to really hear what you have to say and for helping us in any way you can bridge any gaps between us and serving students in our community that we want to serve. I myself have a daughter that's diagnosed with global delays and hyperhip dysplasia, so she's considered medically fragile, and she's 4 years old. Her name is Lulu, and I absolutely love this. I just wanted to let everyone know that we as a committee work in partnership with MCPS to do our best to collaborate with them always, and just to put that at the forefront of everybody's mind, so everyone is aware of that. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera and mute myself, but I will be following the chat. So Stephanie, I can monitor that for you, but if anything needs anything from myself, I will go ahead and just drop my email into the chat and I will turn it back to you guys. Thank you so much again for coming everyone this evening, and thank you to Stephanie and Nicole for bringing us all together.
Thanks, Rachel. And Rachel is the learning specialist at the Berry School. So she used to work in MCPS. And as I said, I'm the vice chair that where I work closely with Rachel. And again, yes, we do support all families, and the MCC PTA, that's our mission, is to advocate for all families. And as a special education committee, our goal is to have all children thrive and do well. And especially in our case, we're advocating for special ed students or any students with disabilities, either 504 or IEP. And just a little about myself. I have two children. I have a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old. I have one who's neurotypical and one who is on the autism spectrum in high school in MCPS. So I'm a parent like you all. I'm here interested to hear what Nicole has to say as well. Professionally, I'm an educational consultant. I'm the founder of Exceptional Educational Solutions, and I specialize in twice exceptional students. So Nicole, we are very excited that she's here today to speak to us. We're very fortunate. And just a little introduction about Nicole. She's an education attorney, and since 2004, she has dedicated her career to representing children with disabilities. In her private law practice, she represents students in the special education and 504 process and in school discipline issues. Nicole often represents students with dyslexia and other learning disabilities, autism, ADHD, twice exceptional students, and students with emotional and behavioral concerns. Nicole opened her education law practice after working in schools representing hundreds of children in special education, school discipline, and Medicaid cases at Disability Rights Maryland, and experiencing the frustrations of the special education process as a parent. So we're very excited that Nicole's here today to talk to us. You can feel free to type anything you need in the chat. If you have a question that comes up, we will have a more formal Q&A at the end, sort of halfway through the presentation. But if you have something more immediate that comes up, Rachel and I will be monitoring the chat, and we'll can stop. Nicole suggested that we stop her and let her know if there's any good questions. So thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, so just confirming that you guys can see my slides now. Yes?
Oh, yes, we can,
Okay.
yes. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks so much for having me, Stephanie and Rachel. I am happy to talk to you guys about what's been going on and what needs to happen next with regard to distance learning and now hybrid learning. And I'm going to talk for a little while. Feel free to throw those questions in there. And I will leave plenty of time to answer questions at the end. So we're going to start, we're going to start tonight with some basics and then move towards compensatory services, because I know that's what a lot of people want to hear about. So that's what we're going to focus on. But the basis of compensatory services and everything that's been happening throughout this year and now more in school is still, all students' rights still come from the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. So just to keep in mind that the IDEA is in effect, and it has been this whole year. The regulations that are state specific, they have been in effect this whole year. They're in effect now, and they never were not in effect. In the very beginning, there were some questions about that. How is it going to play out? And very quickly, the US Department of Education and the state of Maryland said, students with disabilities have the right to FAPE, free and appropriate public education, under IDEA, and that applies in regular, normal times. And it also applies during a crisis. And we do actually have some history to look back on and say, how is COVID, in the beginning when we were sort of like, how is COVID going to be handled? Things like hurricanes that were devastating to specific communities. During those times, the Department of Education, the US Department of Education, they looked at it and asked those questions that we started asking in the beginning of COVID. And, the examples that we have, the precedent was, and continue, that IDEA is in effect and has been, there was never a day when it wasn't in effect. So IDEA wasn't put on hold. That applies also to deadlines. So deadlines related to when IEPs needed to be looked at annually, deadlines related to identifying kids with disabilities, any deadline under IDEA or Maryland education law, they were not extended. And we're going to come back to that because the idea that deadlines are not being extended affects compensatory services. So we're going to come back to that for sure. The expectation from the beginning was that IEPs were going to be implemented. And when I say IEPs were going to be implemented, I don't mean distance learning plans that are half of the IEP are going to be implemented. I mean IEPs were going to be implemented. Now, of course, we recognize, right? We are reasonable people and we recognize that things had to change. We were going to be doing things online that IEPs called for doing in person. That's not the issue. So that's not what the issue is. What MSDE, the Maryland State Department of Education, said based on the guidance they were given from the US Department of Education is that sometimes things would have to be done differently, but they needed to be done. And what was going to be different, just like one of our most basic tenets of IDEA is that the program is individualized for the student. That same tenet applies during distance learning, during hybrid learning, to distance learning plans. We don't get to say that, for example, we're only going to provide 30% of each student's speech therapy. And that was a real thing that one of the districts said in the beginning, not Montgomery County, that was how they were going to decide what students were going to get. And we quickly, were instructed that that was not going to be acceptable. There were going to be individualized determinations as to how we were going to implement students' IEPs. There are students, and I know there's parents here tonight, for whom distance learning didn't work. It was not effective. You cannot educate a child at all with distance learning, with virtual learning. I have clients who you cannot put that child in front of a computer. Their disabilities are such that they are not able to benefit from this kind of environment that we're in tonight. And so that is, one category of students. There are other students for whom they were able to benefit from virtual instruction, but they weren't able to benefit from everything, or they weren't offered everything. They were offered maybe some things or not others, or less than what they were supposed to get based on the IEP. So if your student falls into one of those categories, meaning any category except my kid did totally awesome with virtual learning, I'm going to put him in, this online learning for the rest of his career, right? It was great for my kid. If that wasn't the case, then we start to question, right? Did they lose skills? Did they regress? How did this harm them? And as we ask those questions for each individual student, we start moving in the direction of our compensatory services owed. And, this is not a parent's attorney perspective that everyone should get compensatory services. This is something that is being recognized in a widespread way. The districts across Maryland and the State Department of Education, Office of Special Education, are all recognizing that a very large percentage of students with IEPs are going to fall into the category of probably entitled to some compensatory service. So this isn't that I'm saying everyone should get compensatory service, which you'll sometimes hear referred to as comp service. This is something that's, it's widely accepted. We didn't toll any of the deadlines or timelines. So one of the things that I want to point out that isn't quite as obvious is that we also didn't delay, toll, stop the timelines on child find, on the eligibility process. So unfortunately, one of the things that we did see was a lot of delays in newly identifying students with disabilities. So we heard things like, oh, you think your child has a disability, we'll get back to you when schools reopen. And that was a violation of the law and a violation of the guidance that was given out by both the Department of Education at the federal level and also the Maryland State Department of Education. So practically, it's very difficult, right? Practically, it is. It's very, very hard to evaluate kids virtually, in the beginning, when we were only able to do anything virtually, it caused some big backlogs. My opinion is that if a district is not able to evaluate a student within guidelines, within the timelines established by the IDEA, that they are obligated to fund outside assessments that can be done within the timelines. So keep in mind that if you have a huge backlog, educators, if your child isn't being evaluated, parents, there may be some other options and obligations on the part of the school system to help you with those other options. Now, a lot of school systems are back to doing in-person assessments, and certainly the private assessors are doing in-person and virtual assessments right now. I want to say only one more thing about child find, about eligibility for special education. It's the biggest myth that I hear about special education eligibility, and that is that a child has to be 2 years behind, 2 years below grade level in order to be eligible for special education. That is just a complete myth. It appears nowhere in the law. It would be illegal, in fact, for any school system or school system staff to say to a parent, we're not going to evaluate your child or come to the IEP team to talk about whether to evaluate your child because your child is not 2 grade levels below. Okay, so number one myth, totally not true. And that applies quite often to twice exceptional kids. Kids are both gifted and have disabilities because they do not typically appear to be 2 years below grade level. Sometimes they do, often they don't. So that's just not true. And there's a whole lot more that I could say about how this process of eligibility is supposed to work, and where the other myths are. But if you have, that is sort of more of something that we could talk about in a more general special education rights for parents kind of discussion. We're going to focus tonight just on this stuff. So as I said, IDEA was not told. It wasn't put on pause. What that means is that services on your child's IEP, on your student's IEP, need to be provided right now. And they've needed to be provided throughout distance learning, throughout hybrid learning. So for example, the specific example that was given by the US Department of Education was just an example, speech therapy. We can provide speech therapy virtually, therefore we must, okay, because IDEA isn't told. That also applies to other services. It is not, while speech therapy was given as the example in the US Department of Education guidance, that also applies to other services. Reading intervention. Reading intervention can be provided virtually. We know people who did a good job of it this year. We know a lot of schools didn't do it at all. If your child has reading intervention on their IEP and had reading intervention on their IEP over the past year, whether that was a specific type of reading intervention or a reading intervention sort of in a specific category, they should have been receiving it. And I do not believe it is acceptable to have provided that at 50% or 25% or 75%. And I've spoken to a lot of families for whom, that's what was offered, right? We offered 2 days a week instead of 4, something like that. That is not implementation of the student's IEP. And it's not something that couldn't be done because of COVID. There are a few things that I will allow fit into the category of things that would be virtually impossible. Just a few. Things like academic intervention. So pull out time on a child's IEP to work on academic things is not one of them. It could have been done. Speech therapy, as I said, was the example that was given. So in the beginning, what parents...
Let me to interrupt you because there's a couple of questions. So the 3 questions came through. And I don't know if you're going to cover it later, feel free to just say I'm going to cover it later. But it says, how do you handle when a curriculum was also decreased? 4th grade not writing nearly as much, or math content only 70% of the full year. Like the curriculum was actually decreased.
Yeah. So I think that's actually sort of outside the scope of what we're going to talk about tonight. And it's something that's going to play out over the next few months. So when I'm speaking tonight about what should have been done, what I'm talking about is special education services that are provided under an IEP. Curricular things that they didn't get to, no 4th grader in the entire school got to this part of the curriculum, no 5th grader in the entire county was offered X. That is outside the scope of this particular conversation. So yeah, just to clarify that.
Thank you. The other question is OT alone required to be offered? And I think you answered that by using an example of speech, but.
So yeah, so OT is one of those things that's a little harder. We have to be creative, right? Because it's often hands-on. However, there are absolutely examples of OT being provided this year and super creative ways. I'm not just talking about an OT on the other side of a screen talking to a child. Delivery of manipulatives to the home, delivery of specific items that can allow the child to engage with the OT on the screen. Yeah, OT is exactly the same as speech. It should have been provided at the rate that it was provided, that the IEP says.
Okay, and the other question is, what about the frequency of the intervention? I assume, should it be the same frequency as it was normal?
Yeah, so in my opinion, according to the State Department of Education's Technical Assistance Bulletin, which if you want to, Stephanie, if you want to put that, I can give you a link. I've put together.
You gave me this link. Is this the article? Is this?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've put together a list of resources, and they're all the things that I'm referring to tonight. And one of them is the State of Maryland's Technical Assistance Bulletin. So we're going to put the link in the comments to the place where you can find the PDF. You could actually download a PDF and get all of these links in one place, or you can look at it online. So you can just click through. But the State of Maryland guidance, I think, indicates that the frequency should have been as it was on the child's IEP.
Okay, a couple more questions came through. Would you like to continue on with the presentation, or would you want to take the questions now?
Let's do a little more and then maybe come back to a few more questions.
Sure.
So just to make sure we get through. One of the things that districts did was develop these distance learning plans, and those needed to be done in collaboration with parents. So if your district provided you with a distance learning plan and said, this is what you get, period, that wasn't the way it was supposed to work. And I say that now, even though that's sort of behind us, for two reasons. One, because most of the districts are still using some variation on that plan now that we're in this hybrid time. And two, because I think it is relevant to a discussion about compensatory services that we're going to get to. And I said, we're not going to do the same thing for everyone, like 50% of everything for everyone. Can't do that. So now we are all sort of in this returning to school buildings phase, right? We are starting to return. We're not quite yet, but we're starting. So wherever your family is. So let's talk about what you should be thinking about in returning to school buildings. First of all, and all of this is building up to this compensatory services question. So hang in there with me. Present levels of performance is a section on your child's IEP in the very beginning that should include good hard data. Data means numbers. Data is important. Data is not subjective. Data is not, Evan is a great kid who's lovely to be around. That's not data. That's you can say that, but it doesn't actually tell us what the child's level of performance in their area of need is. So after this year, virtually every child has a different present level of performance than they did 14 months ago. Okay, they are not in the same place. Maybe they did well. Maybe there's a few who moved it along, but we need to update present levels of performance. So parents, you should be in there having IEP meetings, updating present levels of performance. Which brings us to the question of where do we get the data? And then back to that question of testing. While the IDEA says we must evaluate kids at least every 3 years, it says at least. If a child needs to be evaluated more often than that, we absolutely can do so. There is no waiting for 3 years. There's no requirement for that. Does your child need to be reevaluated? Maybe it's only been 2 years and it's going to be another year before the school system tells you, oh, your child's up for reevaluation. Maybe it needs to be done now. So we need that information in order to determine, okay, new present levels, we have new data, do we need new or different services? And for some kids, we might need more services. For some kids, they might have had private tutoring, they might have, they might be a really independent learner, some of the older kids especially, and done great. They need different or less. But we need to talk about it again. Okay, so that's the first step. What should I do right now? What you should do right now is collect your data, have a meeting, new present levels, so that you can do the rest of the IEP process, even if it's not your turn, even if it's not your annual review date. You can have as many IEP meetings as you want, right? I recognize, I am fully aware of how busy and overwhelmed this feels to school district staff. And I feel empathetic to that, but we have to look out for the individual child, and this is what's best for the individual child. So, okay, so to move towards compensatory services. So first of all, the idea of compensatory services isn't new. It's not something that we made up for COVID, okay? It's not something that we had to have this major world crisis in order to invent. It was something that was always there, okay? So the criteria that we use to figure out what to do and what is owed and how to handle it, there's some guidance already out there for us to rely on. Compensatory services has always been a thing that existed that is intended to bring a child to where they would have been had they gotten the appropriate services. So there's lots of reasons why kids miss IEP services. It might, I've seen times when, for example, a school couldn't find a speech pathologist, so no kids got speech language therapy for several months in a particular school. That might be an example. There's lots of other reasons. Somebody just made a mistake. There's reasons, why kids' IEP services are not implemented. So there is, that's always been there. And we've always had those discussions either in an IEP team or in some kind of appeal process, right? Which we're going to talk about what the options are for. So we're going to rely on the way we've always done it for compensatory services this year too. So there's a few different ways that I mentioned IEP meetings. So the IEP meetings is sort of the potential first step to discuss compensatory services. Now, my understanding is that most districts right now are saying we're not quite ready to have this conversation. And I understand why they're saying that, right? Because we need to evaluate a child's present levels. We want them to come back to the school building. We want to see how they do. We want to evaluate whether there's been regression, how much regression. I get it, okay? So there's a delay. And they don't want to have this conversation, some of them, in IEP meetings yet. If you want to have this conversation in an IEP team, you absolutely can. And what I want you to do in that meeting is have an individualized conversation about what this particular child, what their present levels of performance are now, what new data we have, and what they need to bring them to where they would have been had it not been for this failure to provide specific services. How much progress do we expect they would have made? Okay. Disability Rights Maryland put out a good guide. Check out their website, their resources, because they said that a decision in an IEP team regarding compensatory services shouldn't be made if we don't have enough information yet about what the child did or didn't receive. So if we don't know yet, if the child hasn't gone back to school or things are still ongoing, so if we don't have the information, we can't make that decision yet. We talked about present levels. It's all about the data. And I want to talk about the data that you guys have available to you as parents. So parents, you are the expert at your child. Nobody knows your kid better than you do. And in fact, this year, you are even more of an expert. I've always said that, but this year in particular, you are the expert at your child. You were with them, you were their teacher, you were their administrator, you were their, counselor, you were everything, right? Or somebody was, right? You have a babysitter, you have, whoever it was that did that, a grandparent. In my house, lots of help from the grandparents. Those people have information. And if we were having this conversation 6 months ago, I would have given you a whole bunch of information about how to take data, what to take data on. We're kind of past that now, but what you have at home is relevant and you should present it. If you were using the 1-minute reader app and keeping, reading fluency data for your child, you should offer that up. If you were taking notes on what percentage of the time your kid was able to do their homework independently, or writing down days that they weren't, and so you can, put that together in writing, offer that up. That's data. When we make this determination, do you like my rainbow pen? I love the rainbow pen. It's all about what the individual child needs. What I am afraid of is that once the school systems start saying, okay, we are now ready to have this conversation about compensatory services, they are going to say, we're giving you all summer school. That's your compensatory service. Sign this paper that says you accept this as your compensatory service. I do not believe that meets the criteria given to us by the IDEA and the guidance we've gotten on COVID specifically. I believe that this has to be an individualized determination. We can't just dump every kid into summer school or after school this or whatever it is that they're going to come up with. I don't know yet, but I very much suspect that a lot of families are going to be told, this is what we're doing for compensatory service. So that's what your kid's going to get. And that's just not how this works. Okay. Everybody's different. Everybody has different needs. And so we need to consider that when we make these determinations. So how do we make the determination? Well, in some districts, it's not popular in Maryland, but in some places, the way we do that is a simple 1-for-1 analysis. You missed an hour of service, we make up an hour of service. That is not popular in Maryland. Are we making up for this particular skills the student missed? That would be an appropriate question to ask. This next question, what is needed to bring the child to where they would have been if they had gotten the service that they were supposed to get? That is the criteria that is supported by the courts in the area that we live in Maryland. It is the number one question I want you to ask. It is the best question. What do you need to help them catch up? Sometimes you don't need as much. They did pretty well this year. Other times they need what was on their IEP. We're going to make up for what was on the IEP. In a third possibility, they need more now than they missed, because they have fallen so far behind that in order to that's the only way to get them to where they would have been. So there is no one formula that we apply. So again, I understand the gravity of what I'm saying here. I understand that I am suggesting that school districts have this huge obligation to provide a huge amount of service to a huge number of kids. Yeah, you're right. I am saying that. And because I'm not quite sure that it is actually possible for school systems to meet their obligations under the law for students that have parents like you, and I know what you're like because you're on this call at 8 p.m., we might have to consider, that they can't do it, right? And if your child needs a high level of compensatory service in order to bring them to where they would have been had they gotten the services that they should have gotten according to their IEP, we might need to consider private services. And I do believe that that is a reasonable request, and that there are that is something that is awarded, because as I was saying, compensatory services is nothing new. right? Compensatory services is something that's been negotiated back and forth between parents and school districts for a long time. And awarding reimbursement or funding for private services is one of the things. It's one of the options for parents who put together the data and make a data-driven argument for it. So here's the problem, right? So far we've talked about talking about this in an IEP meeting. Now, number one problem, a lot of districts are saying that they're not ready to talk about it. The problem is you only have 1 year to file a complaint with the Maryland State Department of Education, or it applies in other states as well. A complaint to the State Department of Education under the IDEA, it's an MSDE complaint, an IDEA complaint, called lots of things, a state complaint. There is a 1 year statute of limitations. They will only look back at what the child missed for 1 year. So today we're at April 28th. They will now today only look back to April 28th, 2020. That's after we already started virtual learning here, which means that sort of what we're left with is you've got to file your state complaint now if you want them to look back all the way to the beginning of COVID. If you ask for an IEP meeting and they put it on the calendar for 5 or 6 weeks from now, that's 5 or 6 less weeks that you're entitled to have MSDE, the State Department of Education, look back to determine if compensatory services, if there was a violation, meaning they did not implement the child's IEP appropriately, and therefore you're entitled to compensatory services. So it's a catch-22. Yes, the first thing that we would do in normal times is try to be cooperative and hold an IEP meeting and come to an agreement on what should be provided when a student misses IEP services. We don't have time for that this month or this year, because the advocates and the attorneys like me who work in the state of Maryland, we went to the state of Maryland and we said, hey guys, every parent is in this situation. You don't want them all filing state complaints, do you? Like, let them have some extra time. And their response was statute of limitations weren't told, and neither was this one. So they are not extending the timelines for IDEA complaints, meaning, again, you can only go back 1 year from today. So it's up to you. If you have 100% faith that you're going to go to your student's IEP meeting and have a productive conversation about compensatory services, and that your IEP team is going to give you exactly what your child is entitled to, you do not need to file a state complaint. If you have any doubt that you're going to go to an IEP meeting and they are going to say, yes, we agree that your child is entitled to compensatory service. Yes, we agree that they're entitled to exactly the compensatory service that you think they're entitled to, then you should consider filing a state complaint, an MSE complaint, IDEA complaint. And that is 100% because of the statute of limitations, which we asked them to extend and they didn't want to extend. So, those are the two most clear options. Once you have gone through all the criteria that I talked about with regard to what data do we have, what data do we need testing, what is the child's present levels, what did the primary educator for the child this year, which is parent in most cases, what data did they have and input do they have? Once you put all that stuff together, your options are have this conversation with the IEP team last week, or file an MSDE complaint last week, right? Or last month. So there's a lot of resources that are out there. As I was saying, there's a PDF that you can download that looks like, I might be able to show it to you in a minute. It looks like this. And the link is in the chat to get this PDF. And this PDF has the Maryland State Department of Education guidance regarding COVID and distance learning. It has the Disability Rights Maryland Guide to Compensatory Education, which I described most of tonight. That's on there, and it has a few things that I've written up for you in a little more detail than we could go into tonight as well. Take a look at that. I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicole. That was really, really helpful. There are a lot of questions, so, but this is really, really, really helpful. Thank you so much. I'm just wondering if I maybe start at the beginning from where I left off. So, I mean, maybe some of them, if they might have been answered, some of them are a little far back in your talk. So we can skip over it if you already answered it, but let's see, where do we leave off here? Okay. Someone asked, although my child is back in school, the IEP services are still being administered virtually. Virtual is not effective for my child. Is there a way to request in-person IEP services?
Yes, the answer to that is yes. If virtual is not effective for your child, it's not appropriate for your child, then the plan needs to be changed. We are now able to provide in-person services, and your child, they should, yes, your child should be able to get in-person services at this point. And you should be talking about compensatory services to make up for the fact that they didn't benefit from virtual services before now.
Thank you. What about denial of access because accommodations were not provided?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the answer is actually different than everything else I've talked about. So you cannot file a state complaint, an IDEA complaint, because it's an IDEA complaint for a 504 violation. There is a separate 504 complaint process, which is different from this. And again, just sort of outside the scope of what we're talking about tonight. But if you want more information about it, I'm happy to get emails from you guys.
But if there were accommodations on an IEP, then that we're still talking the same.
Yeah, so if there are accommodations on an IEP and they weren't implemented, then yes, they do fit into this category of something you could file an MSDE complaint about. The question I would ask in that case would be, again, back to what was the effect on the child of missing the accommodations? What was the negative effect of not having, I don't know what it was, a human reader or something like that. I think it's very important not just to say, did the accommodations not get offered and I'm frustrated about that? Or did the accommodations not get offered and it had a negative impact on my child's progress? That's the question you need to ask.
Okay, great. How about writing interventions for written expression? Did families get this met well or at all? I have been frustrated by a lack of support in this area.
I am frustrated by a lack of support in this area too. There is a definite lack of support in this area, even during normal times. The answer to during distance learning is if it was on your child's IEP, they should have figured out how to do it. It might have looked different, but they should have done it. I think we are very much behind in providing evidence-based writing instruction and intervention. It is out there, it does exist, but virtually no public school is doing a good job of it. So I hear your frustration. There are ways to address it.
Thanks. What about supports that are aimed at attentional and emotional regulation implemented by the teacher for kids whom virtual did not work at all and refused to participate?
So I do think that the supports provided for attention and emotional regulations are exactly the same as any other services. So I have a lot of families who had one-to-one aides, for example, and in a situation where a school team was being creative and was meeting their obligations, they were providing one-to-one aides virtually for the most part to those students. I also think that the extent to which we needed to have been creative extends to changing placements. There were schools that were open during this whole year. If your child has behavioral issues and couldn't engage in virtual or attention issues and couldn't engage in virtual instruction at all, then we probably should have been talking about how do we put them into a situation where they can engage in instruction. And if that didn't happen, and they fell behind because of it, then I think that child would fall into the category of somebody who didn't get what was was obligated to be provided to them. And we need to talk about compensatory services.
Thank you. So here's a little bit of story and question. We were told our child will graduate early because of school, quote, not being able to offer community-based instruction, which would take up one of his class periods per day. No community vocational training that we weren't able to anticipate and that impacted his course of progression, end quote.
Yeah.
We're asking if he can stay in his original projected graduation date, June 2022, and are being told no because he is earning all of his credits, but is getting shortchanged on CBI and vocational training for the past year. Does this sound like he would be eligible for recovery? Not sure if this matters. He is earning a diploma versus certificate.
Yeah. So, okay. So also a good question, because a lot of, and a lot of people have this question. I believe that MSDE has issued specific guidance to students in this exact situation. They've issued a technical assistance bulletin, I think, beginning to answer this exact question. My gut reaction is it is not acceptable to move up the graduation date because they were not able or are not currently able to provide that community, job training and whatever the student was doing in the community. I sort of my, red lights flash when you tell me that they're going to move up a student's graduation date. Students with IEPs are, theoretically eligible to stay in school until, the end of their 21st year. And the credits issue is strange. It makes it hard because I'm assuming that there are no credits attached to that community learning. But what I would say to you is I might not be offering exactly the whole answer, but that question is being asked by the right people and there will be more guidance coming out. And I believe MSDE has started answering that question or already has put something out on it. So keep an eye out. Or check back with me in a couple of weeks and I'll tell you if I've seen it.
Yeah, I know. I just heard from a lot of parents who are concerned about switching from a school, suggesting they switch from diploma track to certificate track as a whole.
No, and we're not going to switch to certificate track because of COVID. No way, Jose.
Okay. Is it possible to request the IDLP, the Individualized Distance Learning Plan tracking log? I understand that the data review teams will consider this when evaluating comp ed for individual students.
Yeah, so you're entitled to your student's entire educational record. That's every single thing in your child's record. So yes, you are always entitled to any kind of tracking log that tracks, for example, related service hours, speech, OT, whatever. If a log was kept, you are entitled to it. If it relates to your individual child, it is part of their educational record. And if it doesn't exist, you can't get it because it doesn't exist. If it exists, the parent has the right to see it.
Can I just ask a follow-up question on that? Is it required that it exists, the tracking log?
I don't think there's this black and white answer to that. I don't know where the line falls for services that are tracked and required to be tracked and services that aren't required to be tracked. I don't think there's just a clear answer on that.
Thanks. I was told I can't get testing done this year. My daughter was last tested in 2019. She has dropped academically. And someone said, I agree with the question above. My child ended up going into a PHP program in the fall. Virtual didn't work for him. What is PHP?
PHP is a partial hospitalization program, I believe.
Oh, got it.
The testing question, the answer is, does your child need testing? So if they were tested in 2019, they're not required to test in 2021 because it's not the 3 years, but that doesn't mean that they don't need the testing. So again, the 3 years is a bare minimum. If there has been a change in status, which you are saying there is, you're saying that she's dropped academically and you believe she needs to be retested, the IEP team absolutely can order that testing this year. There is no, if they're telling you we have a rule that you can't get tested this year, no such rule, and that's not an individualized decision. That, you can file an MSTE complaint on that.
Thank you.
The other thing is, if they're saying we don't have availability to do the testing, then you should send them a letter that says, if you don't have the availability to do the testing, I'm going to have her tested privately, and I'm going to expect that you're going to pay for it. There will be a process, of course, involved later in actually getting them to pay for it, but you should send that letter. If you're planning on getting this stuff done privately, getting services provided privately, or getting testing done privately, and you want to request reimbursement, you should send them a letter. It's sometimes called a Gebser letter if you want to Google that. But it's a notification that you're going to do something which you think is their responsibility, and you're going to ask them later for reimbursement.
If my child is receiving OT/speech services at school, but while virtual, I noticed these appointments were interfering with his academic classes like reading, and my child ends up missing lessons, what can I do?
So this is something that needs to be negotiated with the IEP team. If it's my child or my client, and the suggestion is that they miss reading to get speech, miss English class to get speech services, I'm going to say no, that's not acceptable. Of course, like practically, we understand there's only so many minutes in a school day, but if we are creative enough, if we try hard enough, we can figure out what they can potentially miss. There is always 15 minutes here, 20 minutes there, a study hall, a class period, the morning announcements. Maybe there's something a particular class we gym that we don't mind that they miss so much. This is something that is in your what, where, why, how questions that I always advise parents to ask about IEP services. What is the service? When is it being provided? Who is providing it? Who else is in the room? And when is it being provided? You have the right to know all those things. So this is something that you need to negotiate. And I agree with you. It's not acceptable to me for my child to miss reading to go to OT.
The parents asked, said, we just did our annual review and they wanted to remove several accommodations because he had straight A's and they hadn't provided those accommodations. I was quick to tell them how I had continued to provide those services at home. We kept those and added more that I wouldn't have known he needed if I weren't with him every day for the last year. Alternative ways of demonstrating evidence of learning.
Yep, good job, Mom, right? You did exactly what I've been advising people to do all year long, and you got the effect you needed to get because you did that. You are exactly right that we as parents provided to our children an amazing array of things this year that I don't ever want to do again. I wasn't meant to be a teacher, right? I don't know how you all feel. Some of you are teachers. I have more respect for you now than I even did before. Yes, absolutely. We should. All the reasons that the school districts argue for, well, it was COVID, so X. I'm going to say the same thing. Like removing accommodations because they didn't provide them during virtual instruction. No way. If you, parent, can say, I provided this during virtual instruction. I hired someone to give reading intervention. I hired someone to do executive function coaching. Grandma sat next to him all day long to be his one-to-one aide. Somebody else did his homework with him. All of those things are that's what we did to survive the year. And for all of those reasons, this parent who wrote this comment, you did it right and you got the effect that you should have gotten. So good job.
Someone asked, is compensatory service the same as extended school year?
No, compensatory service is not the same thing as extended school year. It shouldn't be the same thing as extended school year. They shouldn't be offering extended school year because as compensatory service, because there are specific policies and laws that guide who is entitled to extended school year. There are very specific questions that are asked. They're in the Maryland regulations. Google extended school year, Maryland regulations. There are very specific questions that are asked to determine whether a child is eligible for extended school year. More children will be eligible for extended school year this summer than ever have before because of what happened this whole year. More children meet the legal criteria for who's eligible for extended school year. So yes, way more kids are eligible for extended school year this year, and they should get it. No, I don't think that counts as compensatory service, because if you meet the criteria for extended school year, you meet the criteria for extended school year, and you get it because of that. Just like we don't give compensatory services during the school day.
Is compensatory service raised when goals are being proposed, earlier or after? I understand that.
You can have the compensatory service conversation anytime you want.
Okay. We ended up finding a private person to visit our home twice a week, outdoors with masks, etc., from the fall to present, to help our child with the Orton-Gillingham method for reading. This has helped, but at our expense. Does compensatory services ever cover private support at the home if the school cannot provide the services?
Yes, I think this is something that you can negotiate for. This is a perfect example. Your child got what they needed over the course of this year because you made sure they got it. And I do think it is reasonable for you to have this conversation. We provided the service that you failed to provide. This is how much it cost us. We want you to pay for it as our compensatory service. So then the negotiation is going to go to how many hours of compensatory services the child owed, how much is the reimbursement rate that we're going to agree to. It's a negotiation. It can be an IEP team decision. If the IEP team doesn't want to agree to this, if they've been told they can't agree to this, which they probably are going to need permission from somebody somewhere to do, I suspect that the people who are going to get that reimbursement for OG outside of school are going to be the ones who are represented by counsel or who file MSD complaints, or both.
Are there, quote, seat hours that are required for one credit? How can you cram a certain number of credits into a summer session?
I don't know how to answer that.
Okay. Are you getting tired out, Nicole?
Bring it on.
There's a lot of questions, and thank you for the excellent answers. Okay, we did the same. We have an Orton-Gillingham tutor 3 times a week, $210, math tutor, $85 an hour, 2 times a week. Will we get compensation for this?
They're probably going to negotiate the hourly rate, but I do think you should file an MSDE complaint to preserve your right to potentially get that.
Does comp service include SEL? I think that's social emotional learning for those on the spectrum.
Yeah, if your child was getting social skills group or training or something like that, or something similar, then yes.
Great. If fourth grader is on grade level, quote, for 4th grade math, but can't do 2nd grade math reasoning, is that basis for compensatory services?
So if this, it's hard to know exactly what this person means, but if the failure to provide all the IEP services means that this student is now behind that much, then yes. And on grade level is such a broad idea, right? There's so many different skills that go into math and reading. I find it difficult to accept just this student is on grade level for math or this student is on grade level for reading. There's individual skills, and I think we're much better off looking at individual skills. So if you have data that shows that their math reasoning, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, but if you have data that they've fallen behind or further fallen, the gap has widened and they were supposed to have gotten math intervention or math services, then yes. But again, but just to be clear, we're talking about they missed services that were on their IEP before this, this past year have been on their IEP. They missed the services because of virtual instruction. Those are the services you're going to get compensatory services for.
Great. How do you determine where a child would have been? Use the goals and objectives, review longitudinal rate of progress, and compare against rate of progress in previous years.
Yep, the second one is exactly on the right track. It's very difficult, and it is not super, it's hard to be scientific with it, but the most sort of data-based way you can do it is exactly what you're thinking, which is comparing the rate of progress in the past. That's exactly the kind of conversation that IEP teams frequently have and should have.
Great. Okay, too many parents are having to pay for private services. Some simply do not have the means. How can we get financial assistance for private services?
File an MSDE complaint now, and in the section where you say what you want to get out of the complaint, there's a section for that at the end. You should say that specifically. That's what you want. You want reimbursement for or funding for the private services. And just practically, just as sort of a practical matter, I would just say to people, it is a lot easier to get the services, get them started, and get reimbursed for it than it is to negotiate forward, think like looking forward to potentially getting services in the future. That is extremely unfair, and there is a huge amount of inequity in this. There has been a huge amount of inequity in this entire year. We are all very well aware that students who have families who can afford to help them through this year did better than students who didn't have families who were able to provide extra to help them get through this year. It is unfair, unequal, and a major problem. But for you, how can you get financial assistance for private services? File an MSDE complaint and say that's what you want as the resolution.
And someone asked, how do we file the complaint? And I think that was in the link provided.
I don't think I got into a ton of detail about that, and it's just practical. It's a good question. Like, let's just talk about practically how would you go about doing it. So the first thing is MSDE has the details about the complaint process on their website, the Department of Special Education. They have details about the complaint process on there. Read that. They have a complaint form. The form asks you to write a description of the problem and the relevant facts, and it asks you to write what your proposed resolution is. This is something that I do for families in multiple ways. I write them. I file them myself. I write them for the family to file themselves, or I edit something they've already written. And it just 100% depends on family's needs, budget, desire, ability, time available, all those things. It is something that parents can do for themselves. Okay, the MSDE complaint process is not something you have to have a lawyer for. It is something you absolutely can do for yourself if you want help. This is something that I'm working with people on right now. But take a look at their guidance on their website. Use the form. Make sure you follow the instructions exactly. Write a detailed description of the events that happened over the past year. Provide actual data if you can. Provide evidence if you can, and say exactly what you want to get out of it. Be very specific. And if you want somebody to, help you through that process, review it for you, do the whole thing for you, that's something people are hiring me for.
Thank you. That's really helpful to take us through the process. I was told by PG County PGPCS, I think that's PG County, I'm not sure, compliance officer, that the data review team may not investigate comp services until the state complaint investigation is complete. Is this correct, or are these parallel operations?
I think you want the state, if you file the state complaint, you want the state to do their investigation. That's fine. I would rather have a finding from the state investigation before I start discussing compensatory services with PGCPS or any district. I want the finding first. So I don't have a problem with that.
If we want to consider filing a complaint, is there an estimate, wide range, okay, of what to do, what to expect to pay an attorney for assistance with complaint filing?
Super hard question, because for the same reason that every kid is different. Every family is different. And as I was saying, there's different ways that an attorney or, can help you. Okay. So I can only speak for myself. For some families, it is very full service. I review the data, I put the data together, I look at the records, I write the whole thing, I submit it under my own name. For other families, I may do less, write it for them to submit. And in the third category would be families that do all the data collection. They feel that they can write the first draft. They may write the first draft. I offer edits. Those are 3 different categories of ways that I provide assistance to people, and they cost different amounts because they each take a very different amount of time. I've filed 1-page MSD complaints and I have filed 15-page MSD complaints. So what I would suggest is, if you'd like to discuss what it might look like for your family, there's a link on my website to schedule a free 20-minute phone call to talk about how you might want to, how you might engage me, and what I would suggest for your family. So use the scheduling link, pick a time that works for you, and I will answer that question for you.
Great, thank you. Okay, we got 16 more questions. Let me know when you're getting burned out. You okay?
I'm fine to keep going as long
Okay.
as, if you guys want to listen, I'll talk.
Okay, so we'll just keep going. Thank you so much, Nicole. This is so helpful. And anyone who's getting tired can, you can watch it. Actually, we're recording, so we're gonna give a recording later out. We're gonna send it through the MCC PTA to your local PTAs. You can reach out that way to get a recording through to your PTA president, or you can reach out to Rachel Tate or myself. Okay, how do you even assess what your child needs to get the level they should be at if they had gotten all the services over the past year? And are you saying we need to file before the IEP meeting? And if my child's IEP meeting is in May, can I file after the meeting?
Okay, how do you assess what your child needs to get to the level they should be at if they had gotten all the service? You might need a special education consultant to help you figure that out. You might need there are private special educators who offer their services to families to help, answer the question of, what does my child need? You might have a tutor who can help you figure out what your child needs. You might work with some other kind of provider or coach who can help you figure out what they would need to get to the level they would have been at. There is no one answer, because we might be talking about reading, we might be talking about speech, we might be talking about behavior, it's different for every situation. But I would say, if you have professionals helping you, or if you need to find professionals to help you, you are going to fare better than if you didn't have those people putting their opinion down for you, and supporting you in your request for those particular services. So, get yourself help, I think, is the best answer. Are you saying we need to file before the IEP meeting? Your child's meeting is in May. It's up to you. You definitely could still file after a May IEP meeting. They would look back to May 2020, right? They're always going to look back 1 year. You could wait and see what happens. You can ask now, are you able to discuss compensatory services at our meeting that's upcoming? Because they might tell you, no, we're not ready to start discussing compensatory services. If they tell you, no, we're not going to discuss that at this meeting, we're not ready, you should just go ahead and file.
Okay, question about eligibility assessment. Question about eligibility. Assessment of my child was delayed by COVID, and MCPS required us to consent to their postponement of the assessment until they were prepared to do it in person, which was not until December 2020. She was qualified for an IEP and began services in early March. Might we have a claim for compensatory services during the lost months?
Yes. If I understand this question correctly, they delayed eligibility, determining eligibility by a certain number of months, and so the child didn't get services. If the delay was outside of the IDEA guidelines for time. Yeah, the question about, you know, the idea that some parents signed consent to go over the timelines, I'm not sure how that's going to play out yet with MSDE. I think that parents were basically forced, you know, who had no way of knowing what they were giving up, were asked to sign these things or told they had to sign these things. So it depends on the specifics of what you were told about having to sign it, or what, you know, it depends, and we'll see how MSD plays it out. I've certainly heard from a lot of parents who were told, sign this, you need to sign this. And that's, you know, not how this was supposed to work.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of, you know, I know there's been a backlog for assessments, so I'm sure this is a really common questions.
Yep, they need to pay for private assessment.
Mm. Okay, I have opted to have my child remain virtual for the remaining of the school year. I will likely choose the same option for the upcoming 2021-22 school year if offered. My child will be moving from elementary school to middle school, wondering if our IEP will carry over.
Will the IEP carry over? Yes. An IEP moves with a child from elementary school to middle school, absolutely. However, the IEP should be revised at the end of the last elementary school year. It should be revised at a meeting that includes both elementary school staff and middle school staff. My preference is for the middle school team to hold that meeting with elementary school staff participation, but not all schools will agree to do that. So the bottom line is, yes, your IEP carries over to middle school, but there's lots of differences between elementary school and middle school. You need to revise the IEP in the spring before they start middle school. Was there a first part to that question that I missed?
I think it's just related to the being virtual. Like, you know, is that if the child's virtual, does that affect things?
Yeah, I mean, if the school system has an option to remain virtual, then the IEP is in place. I'm not 100% sure. I'm assuming that all school districts are going to have some option for medically fragile kids or immune compromised families or whatever. They're going to have to figure something out for September. But
yeah, in Montgomery County, I think they're planning to have a virtual academy, and that you sign up for the whole year, and might be something they just continue with. You know,
yeah, I mean, if that's the case, the IEP would have to be implemented.
Right, but if it was some other kind of virtual school because of COVID, then that might be different.
If it's an MCPS program, the IEP needs to be implemented.
Right.
If it's a state, if it is any type of public school program, the IEP needs to be implemented.
Right, that's true. Okay. Okay, do we know anything about how special ed services will be designed and provided for the virtual academy be concerned? Okay, right, yeah. So it has to be done. How it's going to be done, you know, it needs to be individualized. Don't let them tell you this is the way we're doing it for everyone in the virtual academy. Not okay. Right.
Nicole, can I hop on and just ask a quick question? This is my own personal question. So my daughter's obviously was 3. She was in the preschool speech pathology program. She has auditory processing delays and global delays, but specifically for speech. I know MCPS is coming out with like a robust ESY and like maybe some type of other programming for the kids. And there's a SEAC meeting tomorrow night, just so everyone knows, if you wanted to attend. And there was a special POPS meeting yesterday that they attended, which I didn't get to watch. However, I was wondering if a family can request for services to be made up during ESY if their child is eligible, if their child is already deemed eligible and is planning to participate in ESY. Are the providers allowed to make up for those services during that time? Or is that a separate dedicated time?
No, I don't see why not, as long as they're not. What I had a problem with is them saying, we're going to give you ESY as your compensatory service. I don't think that meets the criteria. If your child qualifies for ESY, is getting ESY, and they're going to provide, let's say, 15 minutes of extra speech every morning during drop off time or whatever, probably I think that's okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. When we raised the question of compensatory services with school last fall, we were told to contact resolution and compliance. What would have been the school's authority for that direction?
Well, I think the more important question is what should you do now? Because I'm not sure that everybody really, last fall, we really didn't know. I wouldn't have been able to have all this information that I have today last fall. We just didn't know yet. We know so much more now about what the expectations are. So I think the question is, what do you do now? And I think the answer is, when you file your MSDE complaint, you say, I tried to talk to the IEP team about this and was told, you know, I had to contact resolution and compliance. They wouldn't have the conversation with me. It's just one of the facts that you put in your MSDE complaint.
What if a child is in a language program and there is not enough staff to provide intervention in the language of instruction?
May I ask for clarity on what the language of instruction is? Like, is it an immersion program, or is a student in a English as a second language learner?
I'm assuming some kind of immersion program.
So oh, okay. Thank you.
Intervention in the language. I don't know. Okay.
It's Gorky Baltazar. I'm the one who asked the
Thank
question.
you.
Is the French immersion program, MCPS French immersion program? Thank you.
What's your question though? Can you, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, what happens is that there seems to be a disparity between the special education services provided to the kids who are in the general, academy English program versus the children who are receiving special education in the French language immersion program. So I'm just noticing some disparities. So that's what I'm struggling with right now, because I'm at the point where I have a third grader and I want to pull her out of the program because it's just not working out for her, and she's falling further and further behind. And I think the lack of special education expertise in the staff in the French immersion program may be an issue.
Yeah, I hear you. You know best what's right for your child. And I would say, I would hate for a child to be pulled out of a language immersion program if we could fix the special education issues, because at its core, your student is entitled to all of the same special education services, supports, and protections as any other student in any other program. So 100% they should be getting what everyone else is getting. So you're sort of left with two options. You're going to fight for that because those are, that you have the right to it, and you feel there is value to the language immersion program, and that the language immersion program is in your child's best interest. Or you've decided, for whatever the reasons are, that the language immersion program is no longer the best option for your child. You know that best, but I think they're two separate questions. And in theory, I'm sure you're right that the services aren't the same, but they should be.
Is it okay if I just offer from insight to this? Because I was actually in that exact position. So I worked as a special educator in a school that had English Academy and Spanish immersion. And so I had students within the Spanish immersion program that I would pull out for learning resources, and I would teach them their reading intervention in English, even though they were in a full day Spanish immersion program. The difference, honestly, is between a case by case and person by person basis. I had the ability to instruct and teach the reading intervention in Spanish had that been okay, but from what I understand, that was not okay. I was always told to instruct in English, especially because the Spanish alphabet and the English alphabet are different. And when you learn how to read, it's a completely different intervention when you change languages. But a lot of times, special educators are not necessarily trained in the foreign language programs that are offered within the elementary schools you apply to. I know one of the schools, Mid-County, has a Chinese immersion program, and they have students with IEPs in it. However, the special education resource staff do not necessarily speak in Chinese, and therefore they just can't provide those interventions in that language that the students are participating in. So that's one of the biggest discrepancies, is being able to provide those services for students that are in the whether it's the dual enrollment or the full day immersion programs in the elementary school level.
Thanks, Rachel. That's super helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. Is entitlement of 21-year-old graduating this year, hence leaving MCPS, to compensatory services well recognized or subject to further discussions and review by relevant authorities? Okay, that was a little choppy. Okay. Is entitlement of, I guess, a 21-year-old?
Oh, I think I understand. Okay.
Okay.
So even though the student is leaving at the end of the year, I think that this person is asking, could they still be entitled to compensatory services? And the answer is yes. I believe compensatory, you need to address it now, not wait till, because of the statute of limitations, address it now with the team or with a complaint. But the compensatory services, I do believe that there is precedent for continuing to provide the compensatory service after the student has graduated. Somebody might argue with you on that, but that's my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe there's precedent for it.
Someone asked, where does the letter go? I think they mean the complaint letter. Where does it go to?
It goes to the.
I'm sorry. So who does it go? Who does the letter go to? Yeah, the same thing.
Follow the instructions on the MSDE form, which tell you to provide it to MSDE, and it gives you an address, and to the director of special education in your county. Both, it needs to go to both, but follow the instructions on the form. That's what they say. So.
Can that be evidence that he needs more intensive support to be successful in school? Well, that sounds like it was continuation from something.
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, that was about the one. I'm sorry. That was the one where I told them they wanted to take away accommodations and I wouldn't let them and added some more on. So the fact that he was failing most classes before and now he's getting straight A's, to me seems like evidence that he needs more intensive assistance in school.
Well, it's certainly evidence that if you provided more intensive support and then he did better, that is definitely evidence of the need for those supports. I would definitely agree with that. Is it evidence that he needs even more intensive? I'm not sure. It depends on how much more, need for improvement there is.
I meant more than what he was getting in school before compared to virtual.
Totally. Yes.
Okay, so here's a story. My child has had an IEP since 5th grade, received half-day schedule during late 8th grade due to my child acting out in class, according to the school. In 10th grade now, received another disability, which was more than likely missed before and means my child may not been receiving the support needed. I have asked for more one-on-one support, which teachers have noted which teachers have noted as support that is more effective. But I've been told that it probably wouldn't be possible to request due to my child's attendance. Attendance is an issue, but I believe if a child is not receiving the correct support, this may be an issue. Any advice? I'm definitely struggling, trying to figure out what would be best for my child. Was that clear?
Okay, so I definitely can't give specific advice as to what your child needs or what would be best for your child. I can't give any individual parent, and I probably should have said this earlier, but I cannot give individual advice to you related to your child's case. Everything that I'm saying tonight is what the policies say, what the law says, and how, and what would apply to everyone. So just to be clear on that for the entire evening, I don't feel like I can say what would be best for your child for those reasons. I will say things that are a few facts that are true for everyone, and that is that under the disciplinary regulations, we shouldn't be putting kids on half-day schedules due to misbehavior or behaviors that the schools find difficult in school. That is not an appropriate disciplinary intervention for any child. It doesn't meet it doesn't meet the types of disciplines that are available under the law. When the school system fails to identify a disability, yes, any student, any family would have, something that the family could say would be, you failed to identify a disability, a specific disability. And as a result of that, the child did not get FAPE. They didn't get a free and appropriate public education. You could file an MSDE complaint and allege that, although it's sort of pushing the boundaries of what MSDE likes to investigate. They like to investigate procedural violations. So I had this on my IEP, the team didn't do it. That's a procedural violation. An opinion of, the team making a decision based on their best judgment, MSDE doesn't like to question that. So this might be more along the lines of a mediation or a due process complaint, because it's more a question of, was FAPE provided? But what would be best for your specific child, I definitely can't answer that.
Thanks for clarifying. Okay, I have what's another personal story, but we'll see. I have a pre-K child in PEP, the preschool program, who has ASD and was totally unable to access the virtual PEP program, and we withdrew him. Most of his goals are related to social skills, social thinking, emotional regulation, and pragmatic language. How do I assess where he should have been socially and emotionally if he had been in PEP? We have been paying for private services and private pre-K, so he has made some great progress outside of PEP. He's entering K this fall.
Yeah, I think this is pretty fact specific as well. So I really, I'm not sure I'm comfortable advising on such a fact specific situation. What I will say is that if we had talked, if I was giving advice to any family earlier this year, when I gave advice to families earlier this year, and even talked to groups like this, one of the things that we were talking about was documenting absolutely everything with regard to your child's ability to engage in virtual instruction. So some of the questions that I would be asking, I can't answer this question, but I can ask some questions, which is the direction you should be thinking, which is, what type of documentation was provided to the school system as to the child's inability to benefit from virtual instruction? That's where you have to start. Because if we had been talking 6 months ago, I would have been talking about what you needed to document before you withdrew a child, because they're definitely going to give you a hard time because you chose to withdraw.
Then someone wants to know, where does someone find the form to file an IDEA complaint? So should we just type, Rachel, would you mind just typing it in the chat? Because I'm afraid I'm going to lose it.
Yeah, Jen actually put it in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Put it there again, but, or here,
Okay,
I'll
great.
do it. I'll do it right
This
now.
is from a little while ago. So, okay. Okay.
So I just put the link. You can find the complaint procedures.
Okay. So again,
Thank you, Jen, for putting that in earlier.
I mean, I'm specific again, but we'll see. My child, given his emotional behavioral spectrum diagnosis, did not engage virtually at all since COVID began. Was in a PHP for a couple months, doing very little academically on Apex, and is now in person. He is very behind academically. Also, we got testing done a couple weeks ago privately because we needed it done sooner. How can someone apply to be reimbursed now? And then continuing, my child wasn't really getting his accommodations during virtual instruction, and I am not sure he is getting them in person now either. Should I bring up compensatory services at the next IEP meeting?
Yeah, so I'm not going to tell any individual family whether they should do one thing or the other for sure. But when a student is behind academically because they were not able to access virtual instruction, they are entitled to compensatory services.
If you're moving out of state and you didn't get all your services, do you bother filing a complaint?
That's a good question. I honestly, I know this has come up before, but I don't recall the answer. Get back, send me an email. Sorry.
Thank you. So my son is in PEP. I had to provide support for socialization skills. Can I request reimbursement and include in my request that I want them to continue providing the support to make up for what he didn't get, even though he will be in private school next year?
You can definitely file a complaint. You could, I mean, okay, in a situation, not you specifically, but in a situation where there were specific things that he didn't get, a child didn't get, if there were specific services that were on the child's IEP that they didn't get, and therefore instead the parent paid for private services, then yes, I think you can file a complaint. And yes, I think a reasonable thing to ask for as a resolution is reimbursement for payment for the private services. I don't think I can, you know, I can't answer with regard to, you know, where your
Specifics.
child will be next year.
Mhm.
I would say file the, you know, any parent who feels that they missed services should file the complaint now and ask for reimbursement, which happened in the past.
Last year, the ESY teacher told us that she was to pick only 2 or maybe 3 of the ESY approved goals from the IEP to teach to during ESY and drop the rest. Is that acceptable? It didn't seem so to us. Wondering if they'll do this again this summer.
This is a pretty common thing.
Well, it's not like totally related to our topic tonight.
Yeah, it is sort of outside.
Okay.
It is very common.
Yeah, lots of thank yous. Okay. Okay, my child has been recommended to join an LFI program, leaving elementary to middle school.
I don't know what LFI
Oh,
is. Yeah.
What is LFI? I know it's like a non-diploma track program, Learning for Independence. That's what it is. Okay, well, it's specific to Montgomery County, I suppose.
Okay, so I think probably the question is, you know, should you go to a program that's not diploma track? Do you think?
Yeah, that's pretty. Yeah, who should we go to for? Well, it says my child has been recommended to join an LFI program, leaving elementary to middle school. Who should I go to?
Okay, so let me answer this way. Every child is entitled to the least restrictive environment that can possibly serve them. So it's an individualized decision based on whether it is the least restrictive environment that's appropriate for that particular child. So is LFI the least restrictive environment that's appropriate for your child? That's I have no idea. For some children, that's appropriate, and for some children, it's not. If you need advice as to what the best option for your child is, you know, this is what I would say is this question is a common question that parents have, and it is a common reason that parents seek help from a special education consultant, from somebody who's an expert at least restrictive environment, from an education attorney. There's lots of people out there who can provide advice for your specific child. This is something that you probably need some help on. Maybe from a psychologist who evaluates your child. There's lots of different ways to get that, you know, help.
What about when the school has you sign that you are aware or agree, can't remember which, that your child will receive less services this past year? Does that affect parents' ability to file a complaint for not getting all the services on the IEP?
I think you parents in a situation like this should file their complaints. Whether MSD is gonna use this as one of the criteria things that they consider, I don't know, because nobody's done this yet. We are just now. I have filed complaints on this issue. We're waiting now for the very first, you know, findings from MSD on these. So we'll see how they handle something like that. And certainly throughout the year, I was advising families to not just sign those things, right? There were very specific things that I was telling people to write on those things to protect themselves in situations like this. So I don't know how it's going to play out, but it's a potential problem that we were trying to avoid with certain language that parents could add.
There's someone needs to mute their mic. Is that okay? Thanks. What to do if you have last year of elementary school IEP meeting soon, but the middle school team has not been invited? That's a little out of our scope here, right?
I already answered this question.
Yeah, okay.
Middle school team should come.
Yeah,
Or
okay.
representative.
Right. Wait. Okay. A lot of thank yous. Okay. I thought the reduction in ESY goals was due to pandemic. Is that not the case? Is that allowed? That was part of a discussion. Okay, I think that's wow. Okay, we're at the end. Okay, well, thank you, Nicole. Is that anything else? Okay. Thank you, Nicole. That was a marathon and very much appreciated. A lot of thank yous in the chat. People really got a lot out of it. I know I did. And we really appreciate you being here. And so, so Nicole, could you let us know, how to reach you if anyone wants your, further help if they for like, there's a lot of individualized questions that people ask that, you can't answer in this kind of forum, but perhaps they can reach out to you in a different way.
Yeah, my email should be up on the screen now, and I have a website that has lots of articles and blog posts that I've written about this and other things. So, you can read in more detail about this issue and related issues. I wrote lots of times over the course of the last year. So
yeah, that's great. And I know that I think you have certain packages, right now for parents who like are dealing with this particular issue, right? Something. I mean, you don't have to go into it or anything, but I think there's some not huge packages, some smaller things that you could help with. I think.
Yeah, I think what you're thinking of is limited scope representation,
Yeah.
which means that we would agree to a very specific task that families want, and that's a way of being in families maintaining complete control over how much money they're spending on their legal budget. Where myself and the other attorney and the parent advocate in my office, do very discrete tasks for people, which may include one of the things that I mentioned related to MSC compliance.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much again. So we're going to we're recording this, and we're going to save the chat because I know there's been some requests for that. And we will put it, you can contact me. I'll put my email in the chat again, or Rachel Tate, because we will provide this to you. We will send it out to all the PTA presidents and the delegates in your local PTA. But if that doesn't come to you within a week, I'd say, reach out to us and Rachel or myself, and we can get that to you if you would like, or you want to share it within your own PTA, or with friends or whoever who might benefit from this. It's really been so helpful. Thank you so much, Nicole.
I'm always happy to talk to parents. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Thank you so much. I'm going to put my my email again in the chat. That's me. Okay, thanks again.
Okay, so thanks everybody.
I figure out how to save the chat. I'm going to save chat here. Okay, chat saved. Okay, great.
All
Great.
right.
Thank you. Have a good night.
All right, everybody. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Stephanie, will we get the slides too?
Could you provide the slides, Nicole?
So I think the best thing is the resources page. And if you click on the link to the resources page, it provides a written version of everything I talked about tonight. So it's sort of like the article version of this presentation. That's the best thing.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
All right.
All right. Thank you. All right. Good night, everyone. Take care.